what to do. All right, let's go live. 3, 2, 1. All right, and we are live. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on another Community Live event. Today, we have 3 guests with us, and we're going to be talking about technical interviews. So do you mind going around the room introducing yourselves?
Sure. Guess I'm alphabetically first. Hey, everyone. I'm Josh Goldberg. I work as a front-end developer at Codecademy. I've also helped form and take part in a lot of our hiring practices, particularly around apprentices. So I'm excited to hang out and chat today.
I can go next. I am Rebecca. I'm an engineering manager at Codecademy and used to be an IC, so I can kind of speak to both sides of the hiring process there.
And my name is Will Rhudy. I'm a senior technical recruiter here at Codecademy. So looking forward to some fruitful discussion about the interview process from all sides. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. So I think the very first question that we should cover is, what is a technical interview? Because even though it seems self-explanatory to us, that doesn't mean that everybody actually understands what it means. So would you mind going around the room again, just answering maybe in a few sentences what you think a technical interview is, and see if everybody's version of technical interview matches? I'm curious.
Sure. For me, there are generally 2 areas of technical interviews. There's the type where we talk through a problem and at the high level architect, how we might come to a solution. Like if you're trying to build a page, where does the data come from? How does it get arranged? And then there's the live coding or whiteboard kind, where you have a whiteboard or a laptop, computer, something, some sandbox in front of you, and in real time, you're creating something either in actual code or on a written form.
Yeah, I think technical interviews can take a lot of different forms, so it kind of depends on the company, but anything to gauge the candidate's level of technical expertise. So non-behavioral questions, it could be whiteboarding, pairing, throwing random trivia questions at the candidate if that's what you enjoy doing, or talking through high-level architecture.
Yeah. I don't have a lot to add there. I think Josh and Rebecca both kind of covered it from both sides. Sometimes it's going to be more of a, practical, hands on the keyboard type of, problem, or sometimes it might be a little more algorithmic, trying to figure out decision-making sort of thought processes. So from my side, it's, always been a little bit of a combination between not only, what you can actually produce, when it comes to, the technical interview or the actual coding, but also how you got there and kind of being able to talk about just the why, not only just kind of the what. So that's what I would say.
Okay, so it's more like, so we're trying to assess, obviously, but there's different ways to assess, right? Different ways to measure performance, or like the, how well somebody is versed on a different topic. So I guess there's different approaches you can take. I hear that depending on the company, they might use a different technique than other companies. It's not very standardized, it sounds like. So how does people prepare for these kind of technical interviews? Like would you say, it's a fair game to reach out to a company and like maybe their LinkedIn or their Twitter, find out who works there and start peppering them with questions? Like, have you ever been approached by anybody that might be applying for a company you work at and asking you, hey, what's the technical interview? What's the etiquette, so to speak? Because a lot of people feel like it's not adequate to ask these questions, but a lot of people feel like it's fair game because they're trying to, just be the one candidate that gets through. So what do you think? Do you think that people can ask these questions, and how far can you push it when it comes to preparing for this?
I mean, I guess the surest thing to do is if you have a recruiter screen to ask them, they should hopefully have more information, and that's their job to, guide you through the process and let you know what to expect. Ideally, the company is giving you, like some of the larger companies like Google will give you like full-blown PDFs on like what to expect and how to prepare. Some of the smaller companies obviously don't have that available, but the recruiter should always be able to explain what to expect. In terms of reaching out, cold messaging people, I get those a bunch. It's kind of hit or miss if the person's going to respond or not, depending on like how nice you are and how much time you have. I don't think it can hurt to reach out to someone who works at the company, but I would phrase it more as like, hey, like I'm super interested in the company you're at. Do you mind like answering a few questions I have? Do you mind going out to coffee if you're in the same area as them? And making it a more like, I would love to learn about this company. And through that, you can ask more about the process itself.
Yeah, for sure. I would just add, from the recruiting perspective, like Rebecca mentioned, it's definitely, best case, to go through the recruiting department, applying through a careers page, or if you find a job posting that you like on LinkedIn, Indeed, one of those kind of job board type websites. Because it's, my job as a recruiter to explain kind of, hey, this is what we're looking for, get to know you a little bit and sort of see if there could be some good overlap there. It definitely doesn't hurt to send messages cold. I think what I would definitely recommend is try to find people that have something in common. Either, maybe you went to the same boot camp or the same school, or you're in the same city, or if you can find something in common with the person you're reaching out to cold, as well as being humble and appreciative, like Rebecca mentioned, that's where I found you could probably have the most success. So always good to build that network, and you can always start somewhere. So that's,
Okay. So the reason I'm asking this question is I'm trying to think like somebody that might be applying for their first job. We have a lot of users at Codecademy that are trying to land their first job in tech. And a lot of times it feels like, you're just trying to get a job and there's not a lot of leverage that you have. And you feel like one misstep and everything is over, right? There's this conception of, I can't ask too hard questions, like I can't ask really the questions I mean to in my interview, or I shouldn't really talk to anyone or bother anyone. So it's kind of interesting to hear you talk about, no, yeah, it's totally fine to reach out, just be mindful of their time, be mindful of like, their time constraints, and just try to say, you need help or you're very interested in the position, and see how they react to that, I guess.
You also might not get a response, but if the company uses that against you, I would say that's probably a red flag. And maybe you're better off.
Better off not working there.
If they're going to hold you asking questions against you, that doesn't seem great.
Okay. Yeah, I like it when candidates ask. The harder the question, the better. Like it shows that they're thinking critically and they're not just applying for the sake of, I want to work anywhere and this seems like a good match. Which, for the record, you totally should. Definitely apply to as many places as do seem vaguely potentially relevant. But I really like it when candidates ask, like, not just the good questions like, what is your day or what do you do here, but why is this that way? Or like, can you tell me about how this came to be, type things. Because every candidate who applies and can pass the early screens of can you code can generally code, but people who can think critically and work well with others and communicate well, that's beautiful.
All right, that's the winning sauce. All right, yeah, got it. So you heard it here first. I mean, obviously, again, the caveat that it changes from company to company, but for what I'm hearing today, asking questions is always good, and as long as they're respectful and they're within, reason, it seems like it's going to be more good than bad. So you shouldn't really be scared of asking these questions. It just comes down to that sense of you don't want to screw up, but at the same time, you are trying to stand out. And if most people are not asking questions and you are, then you're standing out. So that's a positive. Let's move on to technical interviews themselves and what they mean and what they represent. I think there's a few types of technical interviews. You've talked about them earlier. There's take-home interviews, there's whiteboarding interviews, and there's like a mixed match of both between trivia and like pair programming, like walking through problems that you might have worked on before and you kind of like bring with you to the interview. So can you speak a little bit about the kinds of technical interviews that a candidate will find in the wild?
I could hop in real quick, talk some high level stuff, and I'm sure that Josh, Rebecca could add some examples. But yeah, in my experience, usually companies are going to employ a few different types of exercises to get a more well-rounded perspective on a candidate's strengths and weaknesses and whether they would be a good fit for that organization. And so usually that will entail, when it comes to it, usually some sort of either take-home exercise, or I've seen some timed quizzes that companies will take in terms of, here's a specific language. We have literally 12 multiple choice questions. Here's 10 minutes. And, they're looking for a certain score. And it could be as, automatic and rudimentary, something like that, to being able to, complete a brand new GitHub assignment that would be able to showcase kind of the full coding potential. But usually they're trying to assess a few different types of skill sets. And so you'll usually see a combination of both the whiteboarding as well as some more programming type stuff. So I would be definitely prepared for a little bit of everything, because it's rare that you'll only find one type of interview. It's usually they have a couple different rounds to assess those different types of skills.
All right, more thoughts on the types of technical interviews. What's your favorite? I want to hear Josh and what's your favorite?
I really like the technical take-homes. I personally don't mind coding in front of other people, but I used to, and I think many people do. So I enjoy being able to do something on my own and like really process it without the pressure of someone staring at me and offering helpful-ish suggestions every 2 minutes. And for those who haven't taken one, a technical take-home is oftentimes, at least the way we tend to do it, like we give you a problem and maybe a bit of starting code and ask you to go through a set of features, maybe give you some screenshots of how it should generally look if it's a visual thing. So like oftentimes it'll be some basic assignment like build this type of page that gives these types of buttons and actions, and it should take you generally around 4 to 6 hours, maybe more. So that for me is more fun than like live pressured coding.
Okay. What about you, Rebecca? What's your favorite kind of technical interview?
So I actually really enjoy the pair programming kind of technical interviews, and in the true sense of pair programming, not where like people are staring at you silently and you're expected to code while they watch you, but in the sense where you're literally working together with people to see, because it gives the company a better idea of how you would work in a real life scenario, and B, gives the candidate a better experience of what it would be like to work at this company. And I think it's more close to the day-to-day life of an actual engineer who's on a team of engineers, not working necessarily in silo on some small project, but getting in there and really like working on a specific PR that person is putting together, a specific ticket.
Yeah, I guess being on your own, like Josh said, it kind of removes the pressure of somebody staring at you. But at the same time, you do have to have the ability to work with other people sooner or later, right? So I guess there's sort of like a happy medium, like, and that probably comes down to the person interviewing the candidate, right? And how comfortable they are, like how experienced they are in conducting interviews, right? I'm sure that there's different styles, more aggressive, where they're like asking questions all the time, and other people that kind of like lay back and let the candidate take the lead a little bit more. I would imagine that there's kind of like a spectrum of what to expect when you're doing this kind of collaboration interviews. Will, do you know if you've ever come across a lot of candidates, do they have expressed in the past like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this kind of interview, or like, is it possible to modify the process for me because I prefer this kind?
Yeah, so it's definitely something that I'm noticing more and more, that candidates do tend to have a preference, but usually the company is going to be pretty rigid in terms of this is our process. We're sticking to, these steps in this order. And so usually you kind of have to, dance with the music they're playing you a little bit in that regard. Obviously, if there's special circumstances, if someone has a disability and would need some kind of, situation where they needed more time or some type of, automated, one thing I've had in the past is a candidate who was hard of eyesight. And so they had a program that they would use to help kind of like hear different commands and help them, work through the exercise like that. And so companies will always try to be as accommodating as possible in that regard. But usually the recruiter should do a good job about laying it out, in that first intro call about what to expect. And so you could always have a preference, but and you can always kind of, as Rebecca mentioned, you don't have to, work at every company you apply to if you realize that, if the interview process isn't a great fit, the working environment might not also be a good fit, because there's usually at least a little correlation there. So yeah, it's definitely, fair to have that opinion and, preference, but you're going to have to, work with what is sort of in place at those companies you're chatting with.
I feel like it's one of those tough situations where, as a junior developer, yes, you want to have a voice in who is hiring you, but at the same time, you're thinking, I just need experience wherever I can get it. And you might be willing to put up with some red flags just because you think it can't be that bad, or maybe it will get better, right, with time. I don't know. But it's a fair point that sometimes you just have to walk away if it's not the right fit for you. Let's go over the different types of technical interviews one by one and kind of like take a little bit more of a deep approach to learning what they are and what they mean, or like how to prepare for them. So the first one is the take home. Let's think about, I want to hear about how take homes are usually formed. And I want to know, usually, how do they gauge at the company level what a take home is fair or is not unfair, has a burden to the candidates? Because I'm sure that sometimes you will apply for companies where the take home takes you a weekend, and other companies give you a take home that takes 4 hours. And you might be thinking as a candidate, this was too fast. Did I make a mistake? Am I missing something? Right? Because you're just getting all these levels of difficulty across companies. So what are take homes, and how do companies generally, or at least here at Codecademy, do we go about forming them in a way that makes sense?
I guess I'll go. Yeah, a take home is kind of hard on our end, the company, to get right. You want to balance that it should be complex enough of a challenge that not every candidate's submission looks the exact same. But if it takes a full weekend, 2 days, 48 hours for a candidate to do, then you're not being respectful to the candidate's time. Who has the time to do a take home that takes a whole weekend for every company that they'd apply to? So typically what we try to do is figure out the list of things we want to assess on the candidate, which is normally, can they write clean code? Is it stuff that we as a reviewer can read through and understand? Does their stuff actually work and work well without bugs? And can they display somewhat intermediate-ish comprehension of whatever languages or frameworks they're working in? For example, our front-end take-home would be in React, and you'd write a page in React, and we test that you're able to make React components and manage page state, which is like the core fundamentals of React. I think ours typically, what does it take? Like 4 to 6 hours recommended, but it's totally fine to take, it's totally fine to take more. We want to give candidates a time recommendation so they don't feel like it's going to take them 20 hours, but if it takes you longer, that's fine too. We don't want to rush you. And then lastly, I'd say we Codecademy actually publish what we grade on online. It's open source, like you can read it. But in general, it's what I mentioned before of like code clarity, does it work well? And what was the last one? Does it demonstrate good usage of the foundation framework and language? Did I cover everything you were looking for there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if I were a candidate applying for Codecademy, I think I'm kind of understanding, my code has to be readable, usable, and it has to show that I know what I'm writing, that I didn't copy and paste it from somewhere else, right? So that seems to be pretty straightforward when it comes to take homes. I always wonder if take homes, I've talked to professors in university where they would say, I write an exam that takes me 10 minutes and that's an hour exam for you guys. So there's like a 1-to-6 ratio or something in minutes of what me knowing the material takes to solve versus you. Is that something that happens at Codecademy? Like when you put it together, do you think, well, this would have probably taken me like an hour of solid work. So that's like a fair assessment for somebody that is applying for this role?
We do take the take home. Like, it's not like we just write something we think is fun and then throw it out so that unsuspecting candidates have to suffer. Like, we have an actual process internally of, we figure out what we want, we make some hypotheses of like, we think these would be good sample challenges. And then like, we have especially a range, not just the senior or just the junior engineers take the take home to make sure it's like a reasonable problem. But yeah, I do want to defer now to Rebecca as the author of the How to Ace Our Apprenticeship Take Home post.
Yeah, I don't know how to get something to the actual viewers. I don't know if they'll see
I can share it.
Yeah.
I'll
I put together a post that compiles a lot of advice from our former apprentices on tips for acing our apprenticeship take home. So not necessarily like wholly applicable to all of our take homes at different levels, but for your first job, I would say there's some pretty good tips and advice there on how to make sure that you're submitting a quality take-home assignment. And yeah, ideally the company shares what they're looking for. But I would say, like, for most companies, you'll want to make sure that you're submitting clean code, taking a look at what you're submitting beforehand to make sure you didn't leave in any like console logs, or make sure you're running it one last time before you submit it, to make sure you didn't like introduce a bug right before you submitted it. And there's some more advice in that post.
I love console logs. What's wrong with console logs? Oh no. Okay, everybody watching the stream now or in the future, console logs apparently are not pretty in your code if you're submitting for an application. So I think one question that a lot of people might be having right now when they hear about take homes is, well, but is that sufficient? Like, are people cheating? How does the company know that a take home is good? And I think it's important to clarify that take homes usually are not the only way that a company is assessing you through the interview process, correct? There's several steps, and take home might be one of them, but it's not usually the only step, right?
No, you're correct there, Fede, but it is a little correlated in the sense that you usually have to get through that take-home exercise to get to the final rounds, where you'll kind of do the other types of technical exercises. And so, yeah, it's not the be-all, end-all, but it usually is quite an important just component of the process that you need to ace, or you need to get to an adequate position based on the level and the expectation to make it to those next levels. And so one other thing is, take homes are always evolving too. Like, we usually are they exist for a while, but then it's something that's constantly being updated, or at least looked at from a company's perspective. And so trying to maintain and make sure it's as accurate to reflect the types of day-to-day challenges. So just one other little tidbit to add there.
Okay. And okay, last question about take homes. Rebecca, how far can a candidate do with a take home before you say this is way over engineered? We asked 2 questions and they answered 10. Is there a point where it becomes a red flag for the reviewers of like too much submission, like you went too far?
I don't think that would be a flag. Like, I don't think we would say you cannot move on to the next stage, but I do think it's up to us to be clear in our our grading rubrics to make sure we don't judge them more favorably, because we're giving you an assignment for a reason. We think it's a good amount of time, fair for you and for us to be able to grade. So I would suggest not going above and beyond to, it'll be annoying for the grader. Honestly, it'll take them more time to look through what you did. So I would try to make sure you're like ticking the boxes of what's required. There may be some delighters or bonuses that you could add on as well, but yeah, I don't think it would be a red flag. I just would suggest you don't do it.
Do you know if that's a common practice maybe during the prompt, like the take home prompt, there might be like a line at the bottom that says bonus, like this or whatever, like, okay.
We have that in ours. I think most companies have something like that where it's like, if you have time, you can do this delighter or whatever. Also, some people will want to make it look nice. Like some people will focus less on the CSS styles. Those kinds of things I think are nice. But again, I wouldn't go like, you don't need like a whole design system. That we're not asking for like a production ready app.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just wondering, when you're doing running, for example, if you're doing a race, they will always tell you run a little bit more than the tracker says, just to make sure, right, that you cross the finish line if you're doing a virtual race. So it's sort of the idea of like, I checked the boxes, but did I really? So maybe you want to like do a bit more just for flair, I guess. Okay, so you finish your take home. Let's say that we're a candidate, go, and then we hear back from Codecademy and says, you know what, your take home was great. We would love to talk to you a bit more. What's usually the next step that a candidate encounters after a take home?
Yeah, so just in terms of process, after a successful take home, the recruiter will send that over to one of our engineering members. We usually have a couple folks take a look at it, and then they evaluate it based on a rubric. And if we get thumbs up, we would then sort of move forward to schedule you for that final round of interviews, which usually takes about half a day for us. And every company is a little bit different. These days, from what I hear, I think very, remote interview practices are very common still and seem to be quite heavily utilized across the board. So, but usually in that final round is when you'd be, meeting with more members of the team, potentially some folks outside the direct team, and running through some more of those exercises like the whiteboard or some of the pair programming that we discussed earlier and stuff like that.
Okay. So because Rebecca said that she likes pair programming and Josh said that he likes to take home, I'm going to start with Rebecca this time around. Rebecca, let's say that the next step in the process of the company, imaginary company applying for, is a pair programming challenge. They say you're going to be paired with an engineer, you're going to work through something. What is the typical pair programming experience for a candidate? Like, what do you usually expect every company more or less will throw your way? And how do you prepare for that?
Yeah, so I would say there's probably 3 different options you could have for that, and we use 2 out of those 3. So the first one we do for apprentices is we extend the take home together. So in that case, you'll want to review your take home. And again, hopefully you'll have been given this information from the recruiter ahead of time, or you can ask. But in that case, you'll want to review your code to make sure you know what's going on yourself, so that it's easier to extend it with whatever features we throw at you. So that's one type. The second type would be, here is a new small app we want to build together. And that we do for non-apprentices. We'll say, build this view, and we give you a design to mock it off of, and work on kind of related but arbitrary and not related to our, not from our code base, but related to something we would do on a day-to-day job. The third one, which I don't think we've done, but I know other companies do, is they'll say I'm working on this task that my product manager assigned our team, and this candidate will work with me as I move through that ticket. And so it'll be actually working on code that might end up in production, but it'll be more true to what a pair programming experience would be like if you did get the job.
So one thing that I hear a lot from candidates that are going or preparing for these kind of interviews is that you need to be able to really talk through your code a lot. Because usually if you're on your own on your computer, you're just, listen to music or something, you're just working on your code. And it doesn't come naturally that every time you write 3 lines of code or every time you're going to define something new, that you have to out loud say why you're doing what you're doing. Josh, do you come across anyone that is kind of super quiet or super verbose or something? What is your experience with these kind of interviews?
Yeah, most candidates don't have problems discussing their code, but very few of them are extremely quiet or extremely verbose. The reason why people often say you should talk to your code a lot or be asked to is because as the reviewer or the interviewer, we're trying to figure out what's going through your mind. What do you think and how well do you understand the code? So candidates who can explain that are great. If they don't explain it, we'll ask. If we ask someone repeatedly to explain themselves or their code and they can't give us information, that's kind of a little bit of a red flag. I'm trying to understand your thing and you're not giving me the information I need. Similarly, if a candidate won't stop talking, which does happen, that's also a red flag because I'm trying to communicate effectively and I can't if you won't stop talking. But again, most people aren't in those extremes. Most people, it's fine.
Okay. And I would imagine that, we're all human beings. So a fear that candidates have is that there's going to be this antagonistic figure interviewer that is coming to get you, or they want you to fail, right? Do you think that, I'm assuming that that's not true, and that in most cases, if you're being too verbose or if you are being too quiet, the interviewer would just try to, engage with you, tries to get you in the right direction, right? If you are at that point where you already went through the screening, through the take home, you are in this round of interviewing, they've obviously seen something interesting in you as a candidate, and I'm assuming that the person interviewing you wants you to succeed in general, right? So you also can take these cues and not immediately think, oh my gosh, they said this thing, that this is done. Like you finish the interview, you go home, you turn off your camera, you're like, oh, that I blew it. I'm assuming that there's a bit of give and a bit of back and forth.
This goes back to the conversation of if there isn't, that's a red flag. Again, not everyone has the privilege to be able to be as choosy with their interviews, but if you show up in an interview and you're not given any information from the interviewer as to like what you should be doing, and they're not helping you at all, I probably would not want to work with them. I know I was one time at a company, this is a while ago, I was interviewing, and I had like a mental block, and I couldn't remember the difference between for each and map or something like, I couldn't figure out why my app wasn't running, and they were all just staring at me while I was struggling. And at that point, like, I personally, if I were on the other side, I probably would have just helped out and said, like, maybe try this instead. And after the fact, you can decide if that's, enough to not hire them or not. But I think in the moment, most interviewers who are kind and people that you would hopefully want to work with would help you out if you were struggling or not speaking enough, speaking too much. I would hope they would give you feedback.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
Will,
go ahead.
Yeah, just to add a little bit there. Yeah, I can definitely vouch for the fact that 10 times out of 10, if you're meeting someone in the room, they definitely want to hire you if it's possible, but they also are going to be very, have a certain standard that they're adhering to in terms of what we're evaluating, what we're looking for. And so back to the communication, Josh said it, specifically effective communication. And so when you're either talking through your code or being asked to explain something, it's usually a way for us to get a sense as to that communication, because whether it's Codecademy or whether it's another startup, late stage startup, we're building stuff, and so the ability to communicate effectively and work together is something that's a lot more important at a growing organization that's not just working on huge legacy code bases all the time. And so when I hear in huddles sometimes, how some of these exercises have gone, communication is always something that's mentioned. And so Josh is correct in the sense that there's no one right way to do it. And usually people are somewhere in the middle, but being prepared that, to talk through it or to be ready to answer some of those questions, because they will come up, especially, if you're interviewing at companies, like a Codecademy or like a late stage startups and stuff like that.
Okay. So if you let's say that you're going through this interview and like the person is like, hey, maybe this way, maybe that way, and you're starting to feel a little nervous, or you're starting to feel a little like you don't know if this is is it fair for a candidate to ask for a pause or to ask for a moment to collect their thoughts? And like I feel like sometimes you are in this interview and you feel like it's an exam, like it has a time. It's like, we got 30 minutes and this has to be done in 30 minutes. If you don't finish building this thing, or if you don't deliver on this, it's done, it's over. Have you ever come across any candidates that might be like, can you like give me a second to collect my thoughts? Or like you look at them and you realize they're going through a lot of stress, or they're getting very stressed out. Like, is that common?
I don't know how common, but you can totally do it. That's great. And it shows that you're thoughtful and you recognize that, like, you need a second to regroup. I think that's totally reasonable.
Okay. I'm asking these questions because I'm trying to imagine, a lot of our users, especially when they're new, they have a huge, weight on the shoulders of imposter syndrome of like, I don't even know why they called me back. I'm a fluke. I don't really know React. I don't really know any of this. Oh my gosh, like, my apps barely run. And so I'm trying to ask all these questions because I imagine that it's a lot of questions that people go through when they're applying for this. Like, oh, can I ask for a pause? How antagonistic are my interviewers going to be? Do they want me to succeed? Is it fair to ask questions? So, and I would imagine that as a general practice to practice for this interviews, you can just explain it to anyone, like just get a friend and say like, here's the code I wrote, and I'm going to explain it to you for 10 minutes. Like, is that how people practice for these kind of interviews?
Our code also barely runs. Just kidding. Yeah. interviewing is nerve-wracking for many. Like, it's an important thing. This is your career, your future. Like, it would be weird if you didn't feel any nervousness when you're getting started interviewing. So yes, as Rebecca was saying, +1, the reviewer/interviewer should be compassionate and help you through. We generally at Codecademy try to make sure that all of our interviewers are kind, compassionate collaborators, not angry antagonizers. That would be bad. And yeah, having a friend look at your code is always a good idea. Explaining to the friend the code. I recommend people, first of all, try to get as realistic of a simulation as possible. Like, actually tell a friend, hey, give me this problem or some problem like it, and work with me to solve it in an hour or whatever time period. And then I'd also recommend people keep track of the questions you get, whether it's a simulation from a friend or actually from take-homes and interviews, and then go over them later to see if there are any common threads of things you do really well or not so well at. Like, when I was interviewing, I always messed up hash maps or maps or sets or whatever your language calls them at the beginning. So I got real good at those just by rehearsing them over and over again because I was really annoyed at not doing them well.
Okay. Yeah, I guess practice.
I also just shared, I don't know if we're allowed to like promote different websites, but Pramp lets you do these practices for free. So if you don't have someone around to run through a practice, I would check them out.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I shared it in the YouTube chat. Okay, so final type of interview. So we've talked about take-homes, pair programming code challenges. There's the infamous, most famous type of coding interview question, and it is the algorithmic whiteboard questions. The ones that you see in the movies, the ones that you see at places like Facebook or Google, where it's like, here's this very abstract, obscure coding problem. I want you to do it in, big O notation, and like I want you to optimize it in front of me. These kind of whiteboarding exercises, in your experience, is this something that is still a common practice? Are they going away, getting replaced by pair programming questions? Are they still very much part of the a candidate's repertoire when they're applying for jobs? How likely are you to run into these kind of questions when you're applying for tech companies?
They're still somewhat common, unfortunately. I think they're slowly becoming less common. The reason why companies often give the kind of algorithmic high-level mathy problems because they wanted to see how people think about tough challenges, which is a good idea, something you should try to quiz on. The problem is that these, most of the time, most of the work people do in most software development roles has nothing to do with really advanced algorithms. Beyond things like O of 1 versus O of n lookups, like hash tables, stuff like that, like there's very, very little. So the things are unrelated to not all, but most jobs and are slowly being phased out. For example, most of Codecademy, at least I can vouch for our front-end areas, we don't ask for anything around like binary search trees or linked list shenanigans. Like I will never ask a candidate to reverse a singly linked list, the kind of like notorious pinnacle of rudeness.
We just revamped our backend interview to not do that. So I think we're good there too.
How about that?
Yes.
You just heard it. I mean, does it fit in the definition of whiteboarding exercises, this kind of the ones that don't even have coding in them? Like you get asked questions like, you have 3 people on one side of the river on one boat that only fits 2 people. How do you get this many people to us? Like these kind of questions that are sort of algorithmic, but they are not even code.
I think even Google stopped doing those.
Do that.
I don't think people do those anymore. I think like Google even stopped doing those ones. But like you were saying, like the random, like how many people are in a taxi cab in New York right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like, hey, if you toss an ant on a blender, how do you escape before the
I don't think
blades
anyone
turn?
does anymore.
I actually, my most recent round of hiring where I ended up at Codecademy, whoop, I got a question from a major tech company I'd feel bad naming, where it was, you have 2 robots that land on Mars.
Really?
And they can only go in circles and they have the same programming and all they know is each other. Like they can tell when they bump into each other and they can tell when they bump into like this one crash site from the other. Like how do you get it's weird question that makes me not want to work there. Again, as we were saying, red flag. But yeah, some companies will give you. I thought so too. But yeah, some companies will give you these still, and again, the goal is to make you think. So get the person to explain to you in detail what are the inputs and what are the expected outputs, and then you're going to have to work with them to figure out how to map from input to output.
Okay.
Figuring out what the inputs are is hard, like what the expectations, what you're given, what they want you to do. That's a big part of working with an interviewer.
I'm asking because I was going to say, like, I'm asking because you know, when you're a candidate applying for jobs, you might be time constrained too. Like, let's say that you go through Codecademy, you finish one of the career paths, you build a couple portfolio projects. You say, you know what, I want to get a job before, you know, spring break. Okay, you really don't have all the time in the world to prepare for every sort of possibility, every sort of a scenario. And it sounds to me like being solid and clean with your work, which for take-home exercises, and being able to explain your code for pair programming exercises seems to be a better use of your time as a candidate, has going through 1,000 katas of like algorithmic problems or things like that, because they have their place, but like the proportionality of what kind of problems you're going to come across is more likely that you're going to come across the other kind of problem. Is that fair?
I think it depends on where you want to work. If you want to work at a FANG company, you might have to do more of that. Also, probably if you want to work in fintech, they might ask more like mathy questions. So yeah, I think it's back to your like first question. What company you're interested in? Like reaching out to people who work there to figure out what might be expected of you.
Will, you were saying?
Oh, I was just going to touch on the algorithmic piece just a little bit in the sense of what Josh was mentioning. Usually it's really hard because they want to see the kind of questions you're going to ask. So half the battle is asking those questions. And so usually just keep asking questions in those situations. But yeah, no, I think Rebecca, said it all right there. You definitely can use the hiring process that you experience as a good gauge a little bit or some insight into the company. And so obviously there's, the perception outside in terms of if they have a product or service that you really like or can empathize with. But when you actually start to chat with people, get to know them, learn how they assess folks, you can start to get a better idea as to what, working there might look like and whether that would be a good fit for you.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, we've covered a lot of interview stuff, so I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions and do a little bit of Q&A. I'm going to go through the chat and start answering questions from the back to the front. And one of the questions that came through while we were discussing this was, would this advice apply equally to all levels of developers? Are there things that are more important for a junior developer that wouldn't apply to a more senior position? Obviously, in the context of applying for a job, we're talking here.
I think one of the things that you will probably encounter more the more senior you are systems design, architectural questions, explain a project to us that you've worked on. When you're a junior engineer, I think it's unlikely to get those kinds of questions. And if you do, the expectations aren't as stringent. But the more senior you get, yeah, like you'll be asked to present a project you've worked on and walk through the architecture of what you built, or diagram an architectural, like go through a system design for a new feature.
Anything to add, Josh?
Nah.
+1. All right, +1. All right, so junior developers, more coding, senior developers, more about why you coded that way, or like architectural, like the kind of decisions behind of like why it was built that way, I guess, of the more project stuff. Okay. Is it okay to reach out to the recruiter and ask questions in case the problem statement seems not 100% precise once you start working? I'm assuming started working in the problem or the take home, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, for sure. And usually there should be a disclaimer or a little, if you have questions, please contact so-and-so, because usually the recruiter is probably not going to be able to help you troubleshoot a technical question, but they'll obviously be able to get your question in the hands of the right person. So absolutely, if something doesn't make sense, it's always good to ask questions rather than, do the work that could potentially be just in the wrong direction. So always feel free to be able to reach out to the recruiter and get some clarification.
All right, fair enough. Another question. Yeah. if you all have a resource, more like a request, if you all have a resource of common technical interview scenarios, that will be helpful to me. Do you have any preferred places where you go practice this? Okay, Rebecca, just share a link. I'll take that. Okay, I'm sharing the links, that one link, 2 links. All right, chat. So you got 2 links there for preparing for your interviews scenarios. And I'm assuming that, I mean, there's probably like a lot out there, but here's a couple of them. I don't know if Rebecca or Josh, you have like any preferred places or things that you know that they're like pretty good or they usually get it right when it comes to preparing for interviews.
Rebecca is firing away some great resources in the chat. Plus one, also just generally working on your own projects is my personal favorite way. Codecademy recently showed off some code challenges features where we have challenges you can work with on platform, and then also even better doing like fully fledged projects on your own off platform, and whatever editor you use is always a good idea.
Okay, cool. Is there something I can start doing while I'm a beginner to prepare me for future interviews? So I'm assuming they mean as a beginner, like they're learning to code. Is there something they should be doing along learning to code?
Well, I can't speak to the coding side of things, but in terms of keeping your interview chops, up to par and being ready to go for things like that, it never hurts to have conversations, throughout the year, or even if maybe a job opportunity or something comes across your desk that maybe isn't exactly what you're interested in doing, but having a conversation doesn't ever hurt. It also helps you practice presenting yourself, talking through your experience, so then when you do get onto the interview that you're really excited about, you're a little bit more prepared. So on that, just definitely wouldn't hurt to have some interview practice. So take some of those calls, even if the job doesn't exactly align with what you're looking to do.
Okay, anything to add? No, all right, good. Let's see if any other questions come through. I'm looking through the chat.
But I actually do have something I wanted to bring up. Someone asked earlier commented earlier in the chat that they think some companies, I'm trying to find it, prefer not to do take-homes because they're worried about candidates cheating. That is that is correct. Some companies don't like take-homes, but I would say it's real obvious when someone cheats, either in a malicious way, like copy and pasting, or if they kind of don't understand what's going on and have kind of thrown stuff together from Stack Overflow. So we're not worried about that, and I don't think other companies generally should be, because even though they might unfairly get ahead in one part of the process, it gives them a disadvantage when they inevitably have to explain their code to someone and don't understand how it works. So not a problem.
Okay.
I mean, it's an
I
annoying,
guess, yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's an annoying waste of everyone's time, but it's not like you figure it out eventually.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were saying, right? It's just one step in the process. Like, yeah, okay, let's say that you cheated your way through the take home. Guess what's going to happen in the next step of the interview? You're not going to cheat through the pre-programming, sure. I mean, have you had that in the past? Like, have you had people like try to like have like a second screen, like copy and pasting code, or having something like that? Like, it just seems a little silly almost. But it's a high stakes. Like, if you really want the job, you might get pushed to those limits. Yeah. Anything in the chat? Is it better to be best at one language or have more under your belt? Lots of entry level say the requirements you need to know. Yeah, so I think this goes into you're looking for junior level roles where they ask you for this crazy amount of requirements, like lots of framework, lots of languages, lots of technical stuff. And I think this person's just asking, like, is it better to know a little bit of everything, or is it better that I'm good at one thing and just say, like, I don't know the others?
Sorry, for full disclosure, someone said I looked like the CEO of Mint Mobile, and now we're giggling about this in Slack. But first of all, if a job requirement says you need like multiple languages, that is a like more than 4. Like that's a little bit of a red flag for a junior position. I don't think juniors should be expected to know like front end and back end and full stack. Like that's weird. Second of all, a lot of job requirements will say recommended. You know what some or all of these things, but then the actual requirements are a subset of that. Or they will say you need to know 1 or 2 of all of these, but it doesn't matter which. I say that for junior developers, it's I think less about what language like number count you know, and more of like, do you know how to do a general classification of task? Like if you're a web developer and you're doing front end work, you should know 3 languages: HTML, CSS, JavaScript. If you're like a Python data analyst, I'm not super familiar, but I'm guessing it's like you need to know 1 of like Python or R, and then probably also SQL, depending on the type of work you do. Someone should correct me if I'm wrong there. But
wait, did you just call HTML a language? Did you say they need to know 3 languages: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript?
Fede, we're not gonna get to this. We're not doing this.
Is it?
You heard it here, folks. Codecademy is an official company position. Whatever. I'd say that finally, lastly, 3 of 3. A lot of people feel nervous applying to jobs that they don't meet every single criteria for, or feel nervous if they only meet the core and not all of the like optional. This will make you stand out. I'd say if you meet most of the criteria, you should apply. If you meet some of the criteria, you should probably still apply. Like don't feel like you're wasting anyone's time by applying to a job that you aren't quite qualified for. You never know.
I think that kind of answers a question that somebody just posted about when you're ready to start applying for jobs, which is a pretty common question that we get at Codecademy. It's like, do I need to finish 3 courses, 5 courses, 3 career paths? Like, when am I ready for a job, right? So I think you kind of, Josh, just touched on that. If you know, I mean, Will, you deal with candidates all the time. Do you get candidates that know like, what is the ratio? Like 50% of the requirements, it's like good enough that you might get through? Is it, you ask for 5 languages, they know 3 of the 5?
So it's interesting because, and again, I don't mean to keep kicking this back to every company's different, but at the end of the day, every company is different. And I've worked at places that, were Java shops, and every part of the interview process was Java centric. And you could have Java, Ruby, and Python and be experts in all 3 of them. They would only be assessing like 1/3 of what you'd be bringing to the table. And then there's other companies that are a little bit more, language agnostic. Maybe they want to see your ability to have, a little bit of experience with a lot of languages. I think it depends on the type of company, what they're building. If they are super early on, having more of that jack of all trades background might be super valuable because you can help out with some infrastructure stuff, or you could do some database work. But as you start applying to more mature companies that are going to have more segmented teams, I find that being specialized and being an expert in like what you love doing is usually kind of, in a perfect world, what the hiring teams are looking for. And so having an ability to specialize, for what it's worth, in my opinion, I think would be helpful. And then really trying to target jobs that align with, really where you kind of excel the most at is kind of how I would handle it.
Okay, that's fair. Well, we are at time. We've been here for about an hour answering questions, and I'm going through questions in a technical interview. I want to give everyone here in the room one last chance to share maybe your 1 or 2 generic approaches and tips for success in the technical interviews, and then we'll close it off. Josh, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll give 2 tips because I'm reading the chat. 1, don't believe anything you read on Reddit. People are weird on the internet. I don't know if that's a known fact, but more importantly, know your fundamentals. If you're working in a language, know how to use that language. You don't have to be like a compiler expert, but you should really understand how loops, functions, closures, classes, if they have it, whatever, work in that language. It makes it so much easier to build things and explain your code.
Rebecca?
Don't apply to your dream job first. Find some companies that you're like lukewarm about. Use them as practice. If it doesn't go well, you'll learn from it. And then when you do get to your dream job interview, you'll have more practice and be more comfortable.
And Will?
Yeah, I would just say, ask questions, throughout the entire process. It's good to be informed from your end, and it shows initiative and curiosity on the company's end. Whether it's a process question, whether it's about a piece of a technical interview, there are no stupid questions. So feel free to ask whatever you need to feel confident and, ready to do your best.
All right, and my pro tip for everybody is don't code alone. You've heard it here again and again in the past hour. You need to be able to explain your code. You need to be able to share your code and to showcase your code. So don't code alone. If you come to Codecademy, for example, out of all the platforms out there, you should, codecademy.com. When you're learning, don't forget to step back for a second and go talk to our community, engage in the forums, engage in our Discord server, engage on our chapters program, on a Facebook group, go talk to people, see what they're building, get proficient at looking at other people's code. If you can troubleshoot somebody's code, you're getting better as well when you're trying to explain code, right? So go explore the community, go get better at talking to other people and building that network that is so important to get your first job in tech, if that's what you're trying to do. And thank you, everybody, Josh, Rebecca, Will, for stopping by today. And we'll catch you on the next live stream. Goodbye, everybody. Have a good weekend. That's it.